Let her in. Marcus Hayes said it with one arm locked around his 8-year-old son, and the other shoulder jammed against the elevator door before it could close on the woman in blue scrubs. Ethan's breathing came thin and fast against his father's chest. The boy clutched a bent hospital folder so tightly that the red insurance notices inside trembled. Behind them, a clean-cut hospital employee muttered, "Charity families always slow everything down." Ethan whispered, "Daddy, my chest hurts." 3 hours earlier, Marcus had been standing under the weak yellow light of a downtown office lobby, wiping fingerprints from the glass security desk with a paper towel that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. His night shift had ended at 6, but he had stayed 12 extra minutes because the morning guard's bus was late and Marcus did not believe in leaving a post unattended. That was how he lived, quietly, carefully, without making his burdens somebody else's emergency. His dark blue security uniform was pressed but tired at the seams, and his shoes, though old, were polished until the cracked leather caught the light. On the desk beside his lunch bag sat Ethan's hospital folder, thick with bills, referral forms, denial letters, and one folded drawing made with blue and brown crayons. In the picture, Marcus stood in front of a hospital wearing his security badge, holding Ethan's hand under a crooked sun. Ethan had drawn the building too big and his father too tall, the way children draw the people they still believe can fix anything. Marcus touched the corner of that drawing with one finger before tucking it back inside. Then his phone buzzed. The school nurse's number. By the time Marcus reached the elementary school, Ethan was sitting on a cot with his backpack beside him, trying to act brave and failing. His small shoulders rose too quickly beneath his hoodie. "I told them I could wait for you," Ethan said. Marcus knelt in front of him, placed 2 fingers gently at the boy's wrist, and counted in silence. "Too fast. Too shallow." "You did right calling me," Marcus said, though his own throat had tightened. He did not mention the last hospital bill. He did not mention the insurance review that had gone unanswered for weeks. He only zipped Ethan's jacket, lifted him with practiced care, and carried him to the bus stop because the car had not started since Tuesday. By the time they reached Bennett Memorial Hospital, the lobby smelled of disinfectant, floor wax, and rain from people's coats. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Marcus shifted Ethan higher on his hip and moved toward the elevators, the folder pressed between his forearm and the boy's back. The doors were already sliding shut when the woman in scrubs appeared at the far end of the hall. She was walking fast, one hand holding a small notebook, her ID badge turned backward against her chest. "Hold it, please," she called. 2 staff members inside looked straight at her and did nothing. Marcus saw it. Saw the way they judged her as ordinary. Saw the way the door kept closing anyway. So he stepped forward, braced his shoulder against the metal seam, and stopped it. Pain flashed across his face, but he held firm. "Let her in," he said. The woman stepped inside, breathless. "Thank you." Marcus only nodded. Ethan's folder slipped, hit the elevator floor, and spilled open at their feet. Denial letters fanned across the tile. The little crayon drawing slid last and stopped against the woman's shoe. She bent to pick it up, and for one quiet second, her eyes did not move from the name written in a child's careful block letters. Ethan Hayes. The woman in scrubs held Ethan's crayon drawing between 2 careful fingers, and for one second the elevator seemed quieter than a hospital elevator should have been. The 2 staff members stared at the floor numbers. Marcus reached down with Ethan still against his chest and gathered the denial letters before they could slide under anyone's shoes. "Sorry about that," he said. "No need," the woman answered, handing the drawing back. Her voice was calm, but her eyes stayed on the folder a little too long. When the doors opened to the emergency intake floor, the air changed. It smelled sharper there, like bleach, plastic gloves, and coffee burned too many times in the same pot. Phones rang behind the glass desk. Printer coughed. Out forms. Somewhere behind a curtain, a child was crying in short, tired bursts. Marcus stepped out first, adjusting Ethan's weight against his hip, then tucked the bent folder under his arm with the drawing hidden inside. "We're here, buddy," he whispered. "Almost there." Ethan nodded, but his lips looked too pale. At the reception desk, a woman with a neat bun, and a silver nameplate that read. Marla kept typing for 3 full seconds before she looked up. Her eyes moved from Marcus's old security uniform to the scuffed toes of his polished shoes. Then to Ethan, then to the folder. Name? She asked. Ethan Hayes. Insurance card. Marcus slid it across with 2 fingers, along with the referral letter. His doctor said if the breathing got worse, we needed to come in right away. Insurance card, she repeated, softer but colder. Marcus swallowed and pushed the blue plastic card closer. Marla tapped at the keyboard. Click, click, click. The sound was small, but it felt like a lock turning. The woman in scrubs had stepped away near a column, half in the shadow of a vending machine, her notebook tucked against her side. Nobody greeted her. Nobody asked why she was standing there. She watched as Marla frowned at the screen. This account has an outstanding review. I know, Marcus said. I sent the hardship papers 3 weeks ago. Sir, I can only see what the system shows me. He's having trouble breathing. Then please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The words were not loud. That made them worse. Marcus felt Ethan's small hand tighten around the collar of his uniform. Behind them, a man in a white coat stopped near the desk, glanced at the file, and gave a smile that had no warmth in it. Problem? He asked. Marla straightened. Pending coverage. Pediatric respiratory complaint. No completed financial clearance. The doctor looked Marcus over. His badge read Dr. Nolan Price. Emergency care is not a payment plan, he said, as if he were explaining something simple to someone slow. For a moment, Marcus did not move. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. Ethan's breath brushed hot against his neck. A red exit sign blinked against the polished floor. Marcus lowered his voice, not because he was weak, but because he refused to give the room a show. He's not a balance, he said. He's my son. The typing stopped at 2 nearby stations. Marla's mouth tightened. Dr. Price shifted his tablet from one hand to the other, already losing interest. No one is denying care, he said. We're following intake order. Can someone listen to his lungs? Marcus asked. Just that. Before Marla could answer, another man approached from the hallway behind the desk. He wore a charcoal suit, a hospital lapel pin, and the practiced expression of someone who had apologized so many times he no longer felt the shape of the words. Mr. Hayes? He said, reading the screen before Marcus gave him permission to use the name. Victor Langford, Operations. I understand this is stressful. Marcus adjusted Ethan higher. My son needs help, and we want every child here to receive the proper pathway of care. Victor's voice was smooth enough for a brochure. He did not look at Ethan's chest rising too fast. He looked at the folder. But fairness means we cannot move one case ahead of others without completed intake requirements. He hasn't been checked. He has been classified. By who? The question hung there. Marla picked up a red stamp from beside her keyboard. The rubber base made a soft, sticky sound as she pressed it into the ink pad. Claire, still near the column, looked down at the movement. The stamp came down on the top page of Ethan's folder with a flat, final sound. Deferred. Financial review. Marcus stared at the red words. Ethan stared too, though he was too young to understand how adults could turn fear into paperwork. Please take a seat in the auxiliary waiting area, Marla said. Someone will call you when the file updates. Auxiliary? Marcus asked. Victor stepped half a pace closer, still polite, still quiet. It's just around the corner. More comfortable for families waiting on documentation. But the room around the corner had no nurses moving through it. Only vending machines, old magazines, and chairs bolted to the wall. Marcus saw it reflected in the glass panel behind Marla before he ever turned his head. He saw, too, the way Victor's fingers rested on the folder for a second too long, covering the fresh red stamp as if hiding it made it cleaner. Thank you, Marcus said, because Ethan was watching him. He slid the folder back, careful not to bend the drawing inside, and carried his son away from the desk. Ethan whispered, Daddy, did I do something wrong? Marcus stopped walking. The question hit harder than anything the adults had said. He bent his head close to his son's ear and answered, "No, sir. You just keep breathing with me." Behind them, Claire had not moved. Her face had changed only slightly, but her eyes were no longer on Marcus. They were on the folder, on the red stamp, and then on Victor, who had just called Ethan's case number from memory before Marla even handed him the chart. Claire watched Victor turn away from the desk as if the matter had already been handled, but the small flaw remained in the air like a loose thread. He had known Ethan's case number too early. Marcus did not catch it the way Claire did. He was too busy carrying his son into the auxiliary waiting area, a narrow room tucked behind the vending machines where the light was dimmer and the chairs were colder. The room smelled of dust, old carpet, and the sweet metal scent of soda syrup leaking somewhere inside the machine. A television mounted in the corner played a silent cooking show with captions nobody read. Ethan's folder rested against Marcus's ribs, the red stamp still fresh enough to shine under the fluorescent light. Marcus lowered his son carefully onto the only open chair. Ethan curled sideways, one hand pressed against his chest, the other still gripping the edge of his father's sleeve. "Just breathe with me," Marcus whispered. "In for 2, out for 2. Don't fight it." Ethan tried. His small cheeks puffed once, then trembled. Marcus knelt in front of him, counting softly with his fingers, steady as a metronome. He had learned a long time ago that panic could fill a room faster than smoke. When his wife Lena got sick, he had begged his own fear to stay quiet so Ethan would not see it. Some men shouted when they were scared. Marcus became still. Across the room, a young mother stood near the wall with a baby against her shoulder and a toddler clinging to her jeans. Her face was pale with exhaustion. She looked at the full row of chairs, then at the floor, then back at the baby who was starting to whimper. Nobody moved. A man in a business shirt spread his coat across the empty chair beside him and pretended not to notice. Marcus saw it. He looked at Ethan. "Buddy, I'm going to sit right here on the floor. Okay?" Ethan shook his head weakly. "Daddy, you worked all night." Marcus gave him a small smile. "Then the floor and I already know each other." He stood, lifted Ethan gently, laid his old coat on the cold tile, and helped the boy sit with his back against the wall. Then he turned to the young mother. "Ma'am, you can take this chair." She blinked as if kindness had become a language she had not heard in a while. "No, you need it. Your little boy." "He's got me," Marcus said. That was all. No speech, no performance. Just a chair given away when he had almost nothing left to give. The mother sat down slowly, whispering thank you, and the baby settled against her shoulder. Ethan leaned into Marcus, his head under his father's chin. Marcus reached into the side pocket of his backpack and pulled out the last bottle of water, the cheap kind with the thin plastic that crackled too loudly. He unscrewed the cap, offered Ethan a sip, then noticed an elderly man across the room coughing into a napkin, his hand shaking so hard he could barely hold it. Marcus paused. Ethan saw where he was looking. "It's okay," the boy whispered. "I'm not thirsty." Marcus's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from love. He knew Ethan was thirsty. He also knew Ethan had learned too young how to make himself smaller so his father would not worry. Marcus walked the bottle over to the old man. "Sir, take this." "You sure?" "Yes, sir." The old man took it with both hands. Near the doorway, Marla looked in and frowned. "Sir, please don't block the walkway." Marcus was not blocking it. His coat was folded close to the wall, Ethan sitting on it like a child trying not to take up space. Marcus looked down, adjusted the coat 2 inches inward and said, "Yes, ma'am." Marla's eyes moved to the mother in the chair, then back to Marcus, and something like irritation crossed her face. To her, his kindness looked like disorder. To Victor, watching from the corner with a tablet under his arm, it looked like weakness. "These situations get emotional when expectations aren't managed," he told Marla softly. He thought no one important heard him. Claire heard him. She had followed at a distance, still in blue scrubs, still with her ID turned backward, still unnoticed by everyone who had learned to look past ordinary uniforms. She stepped into the waiting area and let her small notebook slip from under her arm. It hit the tile beside Marcus's shoe with a flat clap. A pen rolled beneath the vending machine. Marcus reached for the notebook before it could be stepped on, then lowered himself carefully, stretching one arm under the machine until his fingers found the pen. He wiped the dust from it on his sleeve and handed both back to her. "You dropped these, ma'am." Claire looked at his sleeve. The dust had left a gray streak across the cuff of his security uniform. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to crawl under there." Marcus glanced at Ethan, then at the crowded room. "Things get lost down low if nobody reaches for them." Claire did not answer at first. The sentence landed too quietly to be dramatic, but too deeply to ignore. When Marcus turned back to Ethan, he opened the folder to find the inhaler authorization form and smooth out the page that had been bent in the elevator. Claire saw the papers clearly now. Denial notices, overdue balances, a pediatric referral, and a small yellow note half hidden behind the drawing. Widower hardship review requested, unanswered. The words were not loud. They were not read like the stamp. They had no authority, no anger, no demand. They were just a forgotten sentence on a forgotten page. Ethan touched the crayon drawing with one finger. "Daddy," he whispered. "Don't let them lose it." Marcus slid the drawing deeper into the folder and pressed the edges flat with his palm. "I won't." Claire's eyes shifted from the drawing to the red stamp, then to Victor, who was already walking away as if a child's breathing, a father's patience, and a missing hardship review were all just background noise. But the notebook in Claire's hand was still open, and on the clean white page she wrote 5 words that turned Marcus's quiet kindness into the first key. "Hayes file. Check intake order." The words Claire wrote stayed open in her notebook for only a second before Victor's shadow crossed the doorway. "Hayes file. Check intake order." He did not ask what she had written. He only smiled the kind of smile that never reached the eyes and said, "Doctor, if you're looking for a patient update, the front desk can assist you through the proper channel." Claire closed the notebook slowly. "I'm just observing." "Of course," Victor said. "Observation is useful when it doesn't interfere with flow." He glanced toward Marcus, who was sitting on the floor beside Ethan, one hand resting between the boy's shoulder blades, counting each breath without making a sound. Some families become anxious and draw attention. We try not to let that change medical priority. The word priority landed strangely. Marcus heard it, but he did not lift his head. He was watching Ethan's ribs move beneath the hoodie. Too shallow, too quick. Claire looked from the boy to Victor. Was he triaged? Victor's answer came instantly. "Classified." "That wasn't my question." Faint pause. Not long enough for most people to notice, but Marcus noticed pauses for a living. Night security taught a man to listen for what came half a beat late. A door that clicked after it closed, footsteps that stopped when they should have continued, a voice that arrived too polished. Victor adjusted the tablet under his arm. Preliminary intake placed him in financial review. Once the account updates, clinical staff can proceed. "Who placed him there?" Claire asked. "The system." Marcus finally looked up. Not sharply, not accusingly, just enough to put the question in the room. "Systems don't see children," he said. The waiting area went still around the edges. The young mother in Marcus's chair stopped bouncing her baby. The old man lowered the water bottle. Marla appeared at the doorway, arms folded, expression controlled. Victor turned slightly toward Marcus, as if correcting a child who had spoken out of turn. "Mr. Hayes, no one here is dismissing your son." "Then why hasn't anyone touched him?" Marcus asked. It was simple, too simple. That was why it made the room slow down. Ethan's hand tightened around his father's sleeve. "Daddy," he whispered. "The lady at the desk stamped it before she asked me anything." Marcus looked down at him. "It's okay, buddy. Just breathe." But Claire heard the sentence. "Stamped it before she asked me anything." She did not react out loud. She only opened her notebook again, turned the page, and wrote the child's exact words. Victor's jaw shifted. Children misunderstand process all the time. They see a stamp and think it means something final. It sounded final, the young mother murmured before she could stop herself. Victor looked at her, and she immediately lowered her eyes. I'm not trying to argue, Marcus said. He reached for the folder beside Ethan's knee and opened it across his own lap. The red deferred stamp sat on the top page like a wound. He smoothed the corner with 2 fingers, then tilted the paper toward the overhead light because the ink was still wet enough to gleam. I just want to understand. If he was classified before he was checked, who decided what he was? Marla stepped forward quickly. Sir, please don't handle the file like that. It can damage documentation. Marcus stopped. His hand remained flat on the page. This is my copy. It's part of the intake packet now. It has my son's name on it. No one answered for a second. Claire looked at the page under the light. The red stamp had pressed through faintly onto the sheet beneath it, but the sheet beneath was not a medical form. It was a billing review cover page. That should not have been on top of a pediatric respiratory referral. Not before triage. Not if the process Victor described was true. Claire closed her notebook. I'd like to review the intake order. Victor's smile thinned. Doctor, with respect, you're not assigned to this case. Then assign someone. We are managing volume. He's struggling to breathe. And the emergency department is full. That still doesn't explain the order. Victor's eyes flicked once toward Marla. Too fast. Marla's fingers moved to the stamp pad on the counter behind her, sliding it backward as if cleaning up her workstation. Claire saw it. Marcus saw it too, not because he understood hospital administration, but because guilty hands often tried to make ordinary objects disappear. He said nothing. He only closed the folder carefully so Ethan would not see the red word again. Claire walked to the nearby staff terminal. Marla moved as if to block her path. That computer is restricted. I know, Claire said. Her voice remained low. I'm only asking for arrival time. Victor stepped in smoothly. I can provide that. Mr. Hayes was logged 22 minutes after initial rush intake. That affected queue placement. 22 minutes? Marcus repeated quietly. He looked at Ethan. We came straight from the elevator. Ethan nodded against his arm. The number on the wall said 3. Claire turned her head. What number? Ethan pointed weakly toward the hall. The elevator. It was on 3. Then it opened here. A small, ordinary memory. The kind only a child might hold because numbers on glowing panels mattered to children. Claire looked toward the elevator bank, where a black dome camera hung above the doors. Then she looked back at Victor. Pull the elevator camera. Victor gave a small, almost sympathetic breath. Doctor, cameras won't change financial clearance. Pull it. The word was quiet, but it cut clean. For the first time, Victor did not answer immediately. 10 minutes later, in a small security alcove behind reception, the elevator footage played across a monitor with dust along its frame. The video showed Marcus entering the third-floor elevator lobby with Ethan in his arms. The timestamp at the bottom read 9:14 a.m. The hospital system showed 9:36. Claire stood behind the chair without blinking. Victor leaned closer, then gave the explanation before anyone asked for it. Clock sync errors happen after system updates. Marcus, who had been allowed to stand near the doorway but not inside the alcove, looked at the monitor through the reflection in the glass. He did not raise his voice. He only asked, Does a clock error stamp a child's folder too? The room became very quiet. On the second monitor, a service log opened beside the footage. There, in plain black text, Ethan Hayes' file had been moved to financial review at 9:16 a.m., 2 minutes after the elevator camera showed him arriving, and long before any nurse had placed a hand on his chest. Victor's face remained professional, but his thumb slid over the edge of his tablet, covering the corner of the screen where the approving user ID had just begun to load. Victor's thumb covered the user ID for only half a second, but half a second was enough to change the air inside the security alcove. Claire saw the motion. Marcus saw the motion reflected in the glass, though he did not know what name had been hidden beneath it. The monitor hummed softly. Somewhere outside the alcove, a chair scraped across the waiting room floor, then stopped. Victor smiled again, smoother than before. This is exactly why we avoid making conclusions from partial screens, he said. A service log can look alarming without context. Claire did not look away from the monitor. Then give me the context. Gladly. Through the proper channel. Now. Victor's hand tightened around the tablet. Doctor, I respect your concern, but this family is under stress, and I would hate for Mr. Hayes to misunderstand internal workflow. Marcus stood in the doorway with Ethan leaning against his side, one arm around the boy's shoulders, the bent folder held against his own chest. He could feel his son trembling, not from fear of Victor, from the work of breathing. I'm not trying to misunderstand anybody, Marcus said. I'm trying to get my son seen. The sentence was so plain it stripped the room of excuses. Claire reached toward the keyboard, but Marla stepped in quickly with a folder in her hand. Dr. Bennett, if I may, the current copy is already printed. The file is in review. We can avoid confusion if we let Mr. Langford handle it. She placed a newer intake packet on the desk, too clean, too flat, not yet softened by a worried father's hands. Marcus looked down at it and noticed the red stamp was missing from the front page. He did not accuse her. He only glanced at the folder under his own arm, where the same red words still pressed through the top sheet. Ethan noticed too. Daddy, he whispered. That's not ours. Marcus lowered his hand gently over Ethan's fingers. I know. Claire heard the child, and her eyes shifted. Children did not understand hospital coding. They understood when a paper looked different from the one their father had carried like a lifeline. Victor gave a soft laugh meant to relax the room. Multiple copies can exist, buddy. Grown-up paperwork gets messy. Ethan pulled closer to Marcus. Marcus's face did not change, but his voice settled lower. Please don't talk around him like he's not standing here. For the first time, Marla looked away. The alcove felt smaller. The air conditioning clicked on above them, blowing cold air across the monitor and making the corner of the new packet lift slightly from the desk. Claire placed her palm on top of it. I want the original triage slip. Victor's smile held. There isn't one yet. That's not what the service log suggests. The service log is not clinical documentation. Then clinical documentation should clear this up. Victor exhaled through his nose, patient, polished, careful. Doctor, this is exactly how rumors start. A family is frightened. A child says something. A father sees a stamp. Suddenly staff members are being accused of misconduct. Marcus looked down at Ethan's pale face and then at the folder. Every instinct in him wanted to push, to demand, to say all the things he had swallowed at the desk. But Ethan was watching, so Marcus did what he knew how to do. He stayed steady. He slid his own copy of the folder onto the counter beneath the light, turned it so Claire could see, and placed one finger beside the bleed-through mark from the red stamp. I don't know your system, he said, but I know this paper was on top when she stamped it. Now that paper's gone. No one spoke. The machine hum filled the gap. Claire looked at the original copy, then at the clean packet Marla had brought, then at the tiny red shadow pressed onto the sheet underneath. It was not proof of everything, but it was proof that something had changed. Victor stepped closer, still calm, still respectable. Mr. Hayes, I can appreciate your eye for detail. Security work requires that. But medical intake is more complicated than lobby paperwork. Marcus did not flinch at the small insult. Maybe, he said, but a replaced page still looks like a replaced page. The silence that followed was brief, but it was real. A chair stopped creaking in the hallway. A nurse passing the alcove slowed her steps. Claire's hand rested flat on Ethan's folder. Her voice changed, not louder, only more final. Hold all footage from Elevator 3, emergency intake, and auxiliary waiting. No verbalities. No cleanup. No exceptions. Victor's eyes moved to her badge, still turned backward. You don't have authority over security retention. Claire looked at him. Then call someone who does. Before Victor could answer, a woman in navy scrubs appeared at the edge of the alcove. She was in her 50s with tired eyes and a badge that read Denise RN. She looked at Marcus first, then Ethan. Her face softened. Is he still not seen? Marla's head snapped toward her. Denise, you were reassigned to pediatric discharge. I know. Denise's hand closed around a folded pink slip. But I signed him in when he came off the elevator. Victor's voice remained gentle, but something underneath it tightened. Nurse Denise, this is not the place for informal commentary. Denise swallowed. Her fingers trembled around the paper. Marcus saw that fear and recognized it. Not the fear of being wrong. The fear of telling the truth in a room where truth had consequences. He shifted Ethan more securely against him and stepped half a pace back, making space for her instead of pulling attention to himself. Ma'am, he said softly, you don't have to do anything that puts you in trouble. Denise looked at him then, really looked. A father whose child had been delayed was giving her permission to protect herself. That was the thing that broke her hesitation. She placed the pink slip on the counter. This is the first triage note. I marked immediate. Respiratory review at 9:18. Claire picked it up carefully as if it were fragile. The paper smelled faintly of alcohol wipes and printer ink. Across the top was Ethan's name. Beneath it, in Denise's handwriting, were the words Victor's process had erased. Wheezing, shallow breathing, urgent review. Marcus closed his eyes for 1 second, not in victory, but in grief. Ethan saw the paper and whispered, "So I was supposed to be helped?" Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "You still are." Victor moved fast then, but not fast enough to look innocent. "Denise, that appears to be a preliminary draft. I'll take it for reconciliation." Claire pulled the slip out of his reach. The movement was small, but everyone saw it. Victor's hand stopped in midair. The hallway beyond the alcove seemed to hold its breath. Claire folded the slip once and placed it inside her notebook. "No. It stays with me." Marla stared at the floor. Denise looked as if she might cry but did not. Marcus bent to Ethan, guiding him through another breath. In for 2. Out for 2. The test had not been whether Marcus could prove the hospital wrong. The test had been whether he would stay kind while the room tried to make him small. And the proof now lay in Claire's notebook. A signed triage slip showing Ethan had been urgent before someone made him pour on paper. Victor's phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up with a message preview from an internal group marked Deferred Pediatric Review. Victor's phone lit up with the words Deferred Pediatric Review, and for a moment nobody moved. The screen went dark almost immediately, but the phrase had already entered the room. Claire's eyes lifted from the pink triage slip to Victor's face. Denise saw it too. Marla saw it and looked away. Marcus did not know what the phrase meant, not yet, but he knew the feeling that came after it. The room had just stopped pretending this was only about one misplaced page. Victor picked up the phone and turned it face down with 2 fingers, gentle, controlled, as if putting a sleeping child to bed. "Internal operations," he said. "Nothing relevant to Mr. Hayes." Claire held Denise's triage slip inside her notebook, the folded edge visible against the white paper. "Then you won't mind explaining it." Victor smiled, but the skin near his temple had begun to shine. "Doctor, I think we are drifting far outside the scope of a single family's concern." Marcus looked down at Ethan. The boy's breathing had settled for a few seconds, then tightened again, small and thin. Every fatherly instinct in Marcus wanted to push past them all, carry Ethan through whatever door led to oxygen, to nurses, to a doctor who would place a stethoscope against his son's chest instead of a stamp against his name. But Marcus also saw Denise's trembling hands. He saw Claire's notebook closed over the triage slip like a held breath. He saw Victor trying to turn a child into a private discussion again. "Please," Marcus said quietly, "if there's something that helps my son get seen, use it. If there's something that only helps people argue, save it for later." Claire turned toward him. Not with pity, with attention. There was a difference. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "did anyone call you before today about the hardship review?" Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Did anyone ask for updated documents?" "No." Did anyone tell you Ethan's file had been moved? Marcus's thumb touched the bent edge of the folder. Only when we got here. Victor stepped in smoothly. Those reviews can take time. Families are informed as capacity allows. Denise gave a small sound, almost not a word. Claire heard it. Nurse Denise. Denise looked at the doorway, where two staff members had paused with clipboards, pretending not to listen. Her voice lowered. The hardship note was in the file last month. I remember because he came in after a school episode, and Mr. Hayes had every paper in order. Marcus turned slightly, surprised she remembered. Denise gave him a tired, apologetic look. You had the drawing then too. Your son showed it to the respiratory tech. Ethan blinked up at her, faintly embarrassed the way children get when adults remember tender things. I made Daddy tall, he murmured. Marcus brushed a hand over his son's hair. You made me too tall. No, Ethan whispered. That's how you look to me. The words softened the alcove so completely that even Marla's eyes flickered. Then Victor cleared his throat. This is touching, but not clinically relevant. Claire's face changed at that. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more awake. She opened the notebook again, removed the pink triage slip, and placed it beside Marcus's folder on the counter. Then she pointed to the yellow hardship note half hidden behind the crayon drawing. This note says review requested. The triage slip says urgent. The service log says financial review. The camera says arrival at 9:14. The system says 9:36. One by one, the papers formed a line under the fluorescent light. The folder, the drawing, the yellow note, the pink slip, the printed service log. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things a busy hospital could bury under 100 larger emergencies. But together they no longer looked small. Marcus stared at them, and for the first time since entering Bennett Memorial, he saw that his son had not simply fallen through cracks. Someone had shaped the cracks. Victor's voice remained soft. You are building a story from administrative fragments. Claire looked toward the terminal. Then let the full record correct me. Access is restricted. To whom? Authorized leadership. The words came out too quickly. Claire held his gaze for a moment, then reached into the pocket of her scrubs and took out a small black access card. It was plain, with no title printed on the front, only a silver hospital emblem worn at the corner. Marla's eyes dropped to it. Denise's did too. Victor's smile faltered for the first real time. Claire swiped the card through the reader beside the terminal. The screen unlocked with a soft chime. Marcus noticed the sound because everyone else seemed to hear something else inside it. Authority. Not loud. Not announced. Just accepted by the machine before any person in the room was ready to accept it. Claire did not explain. She did not turn her badge around. She only searched the phrase from Victor's phone. Deferred pediatric review. A folder opened. Then another. Then a list. Names appeared on the screen, each beside a date, a diagnosis tag, and a financial status. Children. Dozens of children. Respiratory complaints. Seizure monitoring. Sickle cell pain events. Asthma complications. Follow-up delayed. Financial review. Charity load control. Marcus felt Ethan's weight lean harder against him. The room seemed to tilt, not because Marcus was dizzy, but because grief had widened. This was not only his son's red stamp. This was a shelf full of fathers holding folders, mothers sleeping in chairs, grandparents signing forms they did not understand, children learning to be quiet so adults would not call them difficult. Denise covered her mouth with one hand. I knew there were others, she whispered. I didn't know there were this many. Victor moved toward the keyboard. That folder is not meant for clinical interpretation. Claire blocked the screen with her body. Don't touch it. He stopped. The polished man in the charcoal suit was still there, but the smoothness had thinned. Doctor, I strongly recommend we continue this conversation in a conference room. Why? Claire asked. Because the lobby is not appropriate for sensitive information. The lobby was appropriate when Mr. Hayes was humiliated in front of strangers. The sentence did not rise. That made it heavier. Marcus's first instinct was to lower his head, to make himself smaller so Ethan would not feel the tension. But then he remembered what he had told his son in hard moments. Stand straight, even when your voice shakes. He did not accuse Victor. He did not ask for revenge. He only slid Ethan's folder closer to Claire, careful to keep the crayon drawing from bending. If this is bigger than us, he said, please make it strong enough that nobody can bury it after we leave. Claire looked at him then, and something passed across her face that had nothing to do with charity. It was respect earned one quiet choice at a time. She clicked into an email thread attached to the folder. The subject line read Pediatric Cost Exposure Review. Under it, Victor's name appeared beside phrases too clean for what they meant. Reduce uncompensated escalation. Route low-yield cases through financial verification. Avoid unnecessary emergency classification. Printer behind them began to spit out the thread page after page until the sound filled the alcove like a machine finally telling the truth. Victor reached for his phone again, but his hand stopped when he noticed the black dome camera above the security door reflected in the glass. Claire noticed him noticing it. Marcus noticed both of them. The last page slid from the printer and landed face up between the folder and the triage slip. At the bottom was a line that turned the air cold. E. Hayes to remain in financial review unless leadership intervenes. Claire picked up the page, looked toward the busy intake lobby beyond the glass, and said, then leadership will intervene where everyone can hear it. The hospital lobby did not look like a place where truth belonged. It looked too polished for that, too bright, too full of glass, chrome, and quiet rules. The same front desk where Marla had stamped Ethan's folder now sat under the hard white light of the overhead panels, and every sound seemed sharper than before. The soft wheels of gurneys, the printer behind reception, the ding of the elevator doors, the thin cough of a child somewhere near the vending machines. Claire walked out of the security alcove first, still in blue scrubs, still with her badge turned backward, carrying the printed email thread in one hand and her notebook in the other. Marcus followed with Ethan against his side. He did not look like a man coming to win. He looked like a father who had been awake too long, carrying too much, trying to keep his son standing without letting the boy feel how frightened he was. Denise stayed close behind them, her pink triage slip held in both hands as if the paper might be taken from her again. Victor followed last, charcoal suit smooth, face composed, phone silent in his palm. By the time they reached the intake desk, people had already begun to notice. Nurses slowed. A respiratory tech stopped beside the medication cart. The young mother from the auxiliary waiting room stood with her baby against her shoulder, watching Marcus with worried eyes. Claire did not raise her voice. Please pause intake traffic for 2 minutes, she said. Marla looked at Victor before she looked. Claire. That one small movement told its own story. Victor stepped forward with an apologetic smile aimed not at Marcus, but at the room. Everyone, there is no need for concern. We have a family experiencing a difficult moment and a few internal records that may look confusing without proper administrative context. He spread his hands gently, professionally, as if he were calming a misunderstanding rather than standing in the middle of one. Bennett Memorial serves thousands of families every week. We cannot allow fear, emotion, or incomplete paperwork to create panic in a hospital lobby. A few people shifted. The words sounded reasonable. That was their danger. Marla relaxed slightly, as if Victor had put the floor back under her feet. Dr. Nolan Price appeared near the nurse's station, arms folded, expression guarded. This is exactly why these matters are not handled publicly, he said. Clinical priority has to be protected from pressure. Victor nodded. Correct. And Mr. Hayes deserves privacy. Marcus looked at him then. Not angry, not loud, just tired enough for the room to feel it. Privacy didn't matter when my son's folder got stamped in front of everybody. The lobby quieted by one layer. Claire set Ethan's bent folder on the intake counter, turning it so the red deferred, financial review stamp faced the room. The crayon drawing was still tucked inside, its corner visible beneath the top sheet. First, Claire said, this is the folder Mr. Hayes carried when he arrived. She placed Denise's pink triage slip beside it. Second, this is the original triage note, signed at 9:18, marking Ethan Hayes for immediate respiratory review. Denise's hand trembled, but she did not step back. Victor's voice softened into concern. Denise is a good nurse, but preliminary slips are not final classification. Staff can make early notes that later require correction. For a moment, the explanation held. A few heads turned toward Denise. Marla's mouth pressed into a thin line. Dr. Price nodded once, as if that settled it. Marcus felt Ethan's fingers curl into his sleeve. "Daddy?" Ethan whispered. She wrote that before the red stamp. The sentence was small, breathy, and perfectly 8 years old. It did not solve the case. It did not accuse anyone. It simply remembered what adults hoped he had missed. Marcus bent closer to him. "I know, buddy." Then he looked at Claire. He shouldn't have to be the one saying it. Claire's face tightened, but she kept her voice controlled. "Third," she said, and turned a nearby monitor toward the lobby. The elevator footage appeared in grainy color. Marcus stepping into the hall with Ethan in his arms, the woman in scrubs just behind him, the folder falling open, the drawing sliding to her shoe. The timestamp read 9:14 a.m. A murmur moved through the lobby. Claire let it pass before she brought up the system record beside it. 9:36 a.m. arrival logged. Victor lifted one hand. "As I explained, time synchronization issues occur. We cannot make accusations based on one camera feed." It was a strong answer, maybe strong enough to save him for another minute. He had found the crack and poured procedure into it. Claire did not argue. She clicked once. The service log appeared next. Ethan Hayes. Financial review initiated 9:16 a.m. Approved by operations user. The murmurs stopped. The lobby no longer sounded like a hospital. It sounded like a room holding its breath. Victor's smile did not disappear, but it became smaller. Operational users process many automatic routing events. That does not mean I personally reviewed this child's case. Claire looked at him. "I didn't say your name." Something passed across Victor's face and vanished. Marcus saw it. So did Denise. So did Marla, because her eyes dropped to the counter as if the surface had suddenly become very interesting. Victor recovered quickly. The system speaks in categories, not individuals. If a file lacks financial readiness, it can be routed before clinical escalation. That protects the hospital's ability to serve everyone. Marcus shifted Ethan more securely against him and spoke so quietly that people leaned in to hear. "I'm not here to hurt your hospital. I'm here so the truth doesn't get buried after my son leaves." The young mother lowered her head. The old man from the auxiliary room, still holding Marcus's water bottle, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Claire placed the printed email thread on the counter but did not open to the final page yet. "There is one more part," she said. Victor's tone sharpened by a single degree. "Doctor, I strongly advise you not to display internal administrative emails in a public area." "Why?" Claire asked. "Because people may misunderstand them. Then explain them after they're shown." Victor's eyes flicked to the black dome camera over the lobby. He noticed the small red recording light. Claire noticed him noticing. Marcus did too. The elevator dinged behind them, and every person in the lobby seemed to turn at once, expecting someone else, some supervisor, some authority, some final witness. But no one stepped out who looked powerful. Only Claire stood there in scrubs, one hand on the email thread, the other reaching slowly toward the badge still turned backward against her chest. The last file had not yet opened, the final name had not yet been spoken, and the whole lobby waited on the edge of a silence that was about to change everything. Claire's fingers closed around the badge at her chest, and the small plastic card turned over with a soft click against the microphone clipped near the intake counter. The lobby saw the name before Victor could speak. Dr. Claire Bennett, founder and owner. For one full second, the hospital kept making its ordinary sounds. The elevator chimed. Printer clicked. A baby whimpered near the chairs. Then the meaning reached the room, and everything seemed to stop at once. Marla's hand froze beside the stamp pad. Dr. Nolan Price lowered his arms. Victor's eyes dropped to the badge, then to the black dome camera above the lobby, then back to Claire as if the floor had moved beneath him. Marcus did not move. Ethan leaned against his side, small fingers wrapped in the fabric of his father's worn security sleeve. Claire turned the monitor toward the room and replayed the first video. On the screen, Marcus appeared in the elevator lobby with Ethan in his arms, one shoulder braced against the closing doors. The woman in scrubs stepped in. The folder fell. The crayon drawing slid across the floor and stopped by her shoe. Claire let the image pause there. A poor father holding open a door. A sick child holding a folder. A woman nobody recognized carrying the authority everyone in that lobby had ignored. "This," Claire said, "is the moment Mr. Hayes arrived." She tapped the timestamp. 9:14 a.m. Then she brought up the system entry beside it. 9:36 a.m. arrival logged. No one whispered now. Even the phones behind reception seemed too loud. Claire placed the pink triage slip beneath the monitor light. "This is Nurse Denise's original triage note, signed at 9:18. Immediate respiratory review." Denise stood near the wall with tears held tight in her eyes, but her chin was lifted. Claire placed the red-stamped folder next to it. "This is what Mr. Hayes was given instead. Deferred financial review." The red words looked uglier in public than they had on paper. Victor drew a breath. "Dr. Bennett, if I may, the language of these documents can appear harsh to people outside operations." Claire did not look at him. "Then we will use your language." She opened the service log. "Ethan Hayes. Financial review initiated 9:16 a.m. approved by operations user V. Langford." This time the room did not gasp. It became quieter than that. Marla's pen slipped from her fingers and tapped once against the counter. Victor's face remained composed, but his throat moved as he swallowed. "Automated routing can display an administrator's user ID without direct personal action," he said. His voice was dry now. "That is standard in integrated systems." Claire nodded once, almost kindly. "That is why I did not stop there." She unfolded the printed email thread from Part 6 and laid it open beside Ethan's folder. Page by page. Cost exposure. Charity load control. Route low-yield pediatric cases through financial verification. Avoid unnecessary emergency classification. The words were polished, bloodless, and worse than any insult because they had been written by people who knew how to make cruelty sound responsible. Marcus looked at the pages, then covered Ethan's eyes with one hand before the boy could try to read too much. Ethan did not resist. He only whispered, "Daddy, can I breathe now?" That broke something in the room. Not loudly, not dramatically. A nurse near the medication cart turned away and pressed her fingers to her mouth. The old man from the auxiliary waiting area lowered Marcus's water bottle to his chest. The young mother hugged her baby tighter. Claire looked at Ethan, and for the first time her own voice almost broke. "Yes," she said. Then she straightened. "Dr. Price, call pediatric respiratory now. Not after billing. Not after intake. Now." Dr. Nolan Price blinked, the arrogance draining from his face in pieces. "Yes, Dr. Bennett. And if there is any delay, I want your name on it." He moved. "Fast." Claire turned to Marla. "Step away from the intake desk." Marla's lips parted. "Dr. Bennett, I was following direction. Then you will have the opportunity to say that during review. Step away." Marla stepped back, eyes wet, hands empty. The red stamp sat beside her keyboard like a weapon someone had finally named. Claire turned to Victor last. The whole lobby seemed to lean without moving. "Victor Langford, you are suspended pending independent investigation. Your access to patient routing, financial review, and pediatric intake is revoked effective immediately." Victor's polished calm cracked at the edges. "You cannot possibly make that decision in a lobby." Claire's eyes moved over the same lobby where Marcus had been shamed, where Ethan had been pushed aside, where policies had been used like locked doors. "This lobby is where your decision landed on a child," she said. "It is where mine will begin correcting it." Victor looked for support from Dr. Price, from Marla, from the staff who had once moved around him like he owned the air. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody laughed. Nobody explained. The room went silent in the exact place where Marcus had been told to wait. Claire reached for the black access card and handed it to a senior nurse. Freeze all financial review routing for pediatric respiratory cases. Pull every deferred child file from the last 12 months. Contact legal, compliance, and patient advocacy. No records are to be deleted, edited, or reconciled without external oversight. The nurse took the card with both hands. Yes, Dr. Bennett. Marcus heard the words but did not celebrate them. His world had narrowed to Ethan, to the small rise and fall of his chest, to the stretcher arriving from the hall with a respiratory therapist beside it. When they moved toward his son, Marcus instinctively stepped aside, then stopped. For hours he had been pushed out of the way. This time Claire looked at him and said, "Stay with him." 2 words. A protection. Correction. A door opening. Marcus helped Ethan onto the stretcher, careful of the foretray, careful of the folder still in his hand. The crayon drawing slipped partly out again. Claire picked it up and placed it on top of the folder, visible to everyone. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, but the microphone carried it farther than she meant. "I am sorry. The first person in this building who treated me like a human being today was the man this system treated like a problem." Marcus lowered his eyes, not from shame this time, but from the weight of being seen. "I didn't know who you were," he said. Claire nodded. "That is why it mattered." The sentence settled over the lobby. Victor looked away from the camera. Marla wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Denise finally let out the breath she had been holding. Ethan reached for Marcus as the stretcher began to move. "Daddy, I'm right here." Marcus walked beside him, one hand on the rail, the other holding the bent folder that had gone from rejected paperwork to evidence. Behind him, the lobby remained frozen around the red stamp, the emails, the log, and the woman in scrubs who owned the hospital. Justice had finally entered the room, but Marcus did not yet know what a man was supposed to do when the door that had been closed on him suddenly opened wide. The lobby slowly found its voice again, but it never found its old confidence. Conversations returned in whispers instead of certainty. Phones rang again. Printers hummed again. Elevator doors opened and closed again. Yet everything sounded different, as though the building itself had remembered what it had been built for. Victor Langford surrendered his access badge to hospital security without another argument. Marla quietly stepped away from the intake desk, escorted not in handcuffs or humiliation, but through the same employee hallway she had walked every morning. The red stamp remained where Claire had left it on the counter until another administrator sealed it in an evidence bag. It no longer looked like an office tool. It looked like the smallest weapon that had nearly stolen a child's chance to breathe. Ethan was already receiving treatment when Marcus finally sat down outside the pediatric respiratory unit. His old security jacket rested across his knees, still carrying the gray streak where he had wiped the dust from Claire's pen beneath the vending machine. He rubbed that mark once with his thumb and smiled to himself. The stain would probably never come out. Somehow he hoped it wouldn't. It reminded him that dignity was usually found in the places nobody thought worth looking. Claire approached quietly, no longer surrounded by administrators. She had changed nothing except turning her badge around so the name faced forward. She carried Ethan's bent folder in one hand and the crayon drawing in the other. The drawing had been placed inside a clear protective sleeve. The paper was still wrinkled from the elevator floor. The corner was still bent. She did not smooth it. "Your son asked me to keep it safe while respiratory started his treatment," she said. Marcus accepted it carefully, almost as though it were more valuable than every document inside the folder. "Thank you." They stood together for a moment without speaking. Through the window they could see Ethan sitting upright with a breathing mask over his face while a respiratory therapist adjusted the tubing. His shoulders were no longer rising in panic. Each breath came slower than the one before. Marcus closed his eyes for just 1 second. It was the first full breath he had taken all day. Claire broke the silence softly. "The independent review has already begun." Marcus nodded. I figured it would. Every pediatric file routed through deferred financial review over the last year is being reopened. Good. The board has approved an outside investigation. Marcus looked at her. Good. Claire hesitated. Victor is suspended pending that investigation. Marla and Dr. Price have been removed from patient intake until every record is reviewed. Every family affected will be contacted personally. Marcus lowered his eyes to the drawing again. That matters more than what happens to me. Claire studied him. Most people would be asking what happens to them first. Marcus folded the drawing back into the folder with slow, careful hands. My boy got lucky. He looked through the glass toward Ethan. The next father shouldn't have to. Claire understood then that she had not been standing beside an extraordinary man because he had uncovered evidence. She was standing beside an extraordinary man because even after the truth had given him power, he still used it to protect someone he would never meet. 2 weeks later, Bennett Memorial Hospital held a quiet announcement in the same lobby where Ethan's folder had once been stamped. There were no television cameras. No oversized chicks. No balloons. Just hospital staff, patient advocates, several families, and a small wooden podium. The intake desk had been redesigned. The red financial stamp was gone. In its place hung a simple sign: Pediatric Emergency Assessment comes before financial review. Claire stood before the gathered staff and accepted responsibility without searching for softer words. She spoke about procedures that had replaced compassion, about numbers that had hidden children, and about rebuilding trust one decision at a time. She announced the creation of the Healing Door Fund, established to ensure no child showing signs of medical distress would ever wait behind paperwork again. Then she invited Marcus forward. He hesitated. Public attention had never interested him. Ethan, now breathing easily beside him, gave his father's hand a gentle squeeze. Go, Daddy. Marcus walked to the front wearing the same security uniform he had worn the day everything changed. The cuffs were still slightly faded. His shoes were still old but polished. He did not look richer. He looked exactly like himself. Claire handed him the framed crayon drawing. Beneath it, engraved on a small brass plate, were the words, "Kindness came before recognition." Marcus stared at the picture for several quiet seconds. His younger self in the drawing still looked impossibly tall. Ethan smiled. I told you. A few people laughed softly through damp eyes. Claire spoke into the microphone. Mr. Hayes never asked who I was before he held the elevator door. He never asked what position I held before he picked up my notebook. He never asked what authority I had before he treated me with respect. Character that depends on status isn't character at all. She turned toward the employees gathered across the lobby. The first person who reminded me what this hospital was supposed to be was not someone wearing an executive badge. He was a father carrying his son. No applause came immediately. No one wanted to interrupt the silence. It was the kind of silence that settles only after people recognize themselves in both the mistake and the lesson. Weeks became months. Ethan returned to school with an inhaler that fit inside the side pocket of his backpack. Sometimes he still drew pictures. This time he drew hospitals with open doors. Marcus returned to his night security job because honest work had never been something he wanted to escape. But one afternoon each month, he also sat with Bennett Memorial's Patient Family Advisory Council, helping administrators understand what paperwork looked like from the other side of the counter. He never spoke the longest. He usually asked the shortest questions. Who gets left waiting? Would you say this to your own child? Can someone breathe while this form is still being printed? Those questions changed more meetings than angry speeches ever could. Claire often attended those sessions, not at the head of the table but among everyone else. Their conversations remained quiet, careful, and unhurried. Trust was not built in dramatic declarations. It grew the same way Marcus had held that elevator door, one deliberate choice at a time. Before leaving the hospital after one meeting, Marcus and Ethan walked past the framed drawing displayed near the entrance. Beside it sat the old bent folder, preserved inside glass. Visitors sometimes paused to read the small plaque explaining how in Ordinary intake file had helped expose an extraordinary failure. Ethan looked up at his father. Do you think people will remember? Marcus rested a gentle hand on his son's shoulder as the elevator doors opened once again. Maybe not our names, he said, but I hope they remember to hold the door. Father and son stepped inside together. The doors closed softly behind them, not to shut anyone out, but to carry them forward. And somewhere beyond the quiet hum of the elevator cables, it became clear that dignity never needed to shout across a room. It only needed to keep one door open long enough for kindness to become justice.